Welcome to part 7 of my tractor and equipment tour, and we're into the white era. And so I thought I'd start with, I guess, probably what's technically the oldest thing that says white on it here, be this little skid steer, the 425L. It was made for white for their industrial division by Ericsson. And let's see if I can get enough. Minneapolis, Minnesota, according to the tag. They also made skid steers for Ford. I think they might have possibly made something for Gale at one time. This is, as this states, it's four-wheel drive. This is how they did their industrial numbers. First number was wheels driven, 25 horsepower on the engine, and then L makes it a loader. Powered by a 2-cylinder Onan engine, air-cooled. And then hydrostatic from there. Hydrostatic motor driving each side with a chain connecting the two wheels to the hydrostat. Your basic skid steer. I've got another video on this one that I've made. I'll put a link up in there to you can check it out. A little more backstory on it, how I got it and everything. It's a tight fit in there for a larger guy like me, but I can get in there. And it's been handy for doing odds and ends around the farm. Just little spots that are tougher to get in with a bigger equipment. Works pretty good for that. Ericsson not only made this 425L, they also made another one. I'm trying to remember if it was a 430 or 435, but used a 4-cylinder Wisconsin, just a larger skid steer, had a self-leveling bucket instead of this, with a parallel linkage so the bucket would stay the same level. Just a larger unit. Those were the only two skid steers White ever offered, to the best of my knowledge. This is our 244 FL forklift, also another white, and you'll notice it's a different shade. It's not the industrial yellow, it's what they called Euclid green. And towards the end of White's industrial line, they had bought Euclid. The whole industrial line got a new color, and this was it, kind of this greenish color. This is basically an Oliver 550 turned around. Just flip the ring gear over and everything goes the other way. Got the 550 engine in there, gas engine. Still actually has a generator, even though this was built in 1974. And industrial customers didn't care about PTO horsepower. And so the industrial models were labeled with 2 or 4, indicating whether it was 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, and then the flywheel horsepower, which was 44 on these, and then FL designated forklift. They made them out of the 1650, 1655. That was a 478 FL or a 278 FL. There was industrial versions of the 1550 and 1555. Pretty much every model. Never heard of one from a 1750. Probably just too similar to an 1850 to bother having a different model. We got a couple extra weights on there. I remember in my youth we would get Gale forge boxes in, and we had a set of extensions for the forks we could put on and lift the forge boxes off the semi. And between the size and the width, or the how deep they were, we had lift capacity, but sometimes the end would come up here. And so before we'd added some of these weights on, a couple of us had come out, and it's almost like they have footholds here on purpose to give you some human counterbalance. I'm sure OSHA would not smile on that these days, but by golly, we got the job done. And then finally we just tapped a couple holes and put a couple of flat weights on there to help get some more counterbalance. Grandpa ordered this. Word is the story I was told was White had sent word out to the dealers. They were discontinuing the industrial line, and enough dealers said they wanted to put in one more order. White said they would do it, and they built some 244 forklifts. They built some industrial 1550s. So Grandpa put in his order, wanted a forklift, and this was one of the very last ones made. Grandpa ordered it with about the shortest mast he could get, because there was a door on the dealership building that we took crates of parts in and out of, and he wanted to be able to get in and out with that. And so that's why he ordered the shorter mast. Now I wish we had a taller mast, but it still lifts a lot. It's very handy to have around, just moving heavier stuff, plows around, and I use it in the spring for handling the large bulk bags of seed on the farm. It used to have industrial tires on it, and they had some cuts and stuff on them, and they also just were terrible for traction. And Grandpa had filled the tires with chloride to try to get more traction, and all that did was leak and rust the rims. So I got new tires and stripped the rims down and get them cleaned up, repainted them, and put new tires on it, and put ag tires on it, and that definitely helped. Definitely a better bite, and of course no fluid back in them. Yeah, it's got 3,159 hours on it now. It had a Oliver center on the steering wheel, and the steering motor was leaking on it. And so a couple winters ago, I pulled it in a shop and found a seal kit for the steering motor. Pulling that cap off, it just the plastic gave up on it, and so I need to get a replacement one. I tried gluing it back together and it didn't hold, but it does actually have tilt-a-scope, or not tilt, but it does have telescoping steering. There's my problem. I just needed to tighten that down. Ford used the same steering box on some of their tractors, and I find it interesting that underneath the Euclid green, a little bit of blue is showing. Spot there where the paint chipped off. Yeah, handy machine to have around. I've had a few people, when we close the dealership, they're like, "You want to sell that forklift?" I'm like, no, it's just too handy. The only thing that would make it better would be a taller mast so I could lift stuff up higher. It's kind of hard to get the seed bags over the wagon. But that's the 244 forklift. Well, a couple people have noticed this one in the background of a couple other videos. Not an Oliver, but still a family tractor. It's a Deutz D30-06. And the story on this one was my wife's grandfather bought this tractor new and used it on, I guess you'd call it, his hobby farm. He had owned a gas station in town and had plenty to keep him busy, but still farmed. Used it for making hay, all sorts of stuff. And then later on, after he'd passed, my father-in-law bought it and used it for maintaining their property they had out in the country, clean and drive and brush hogging, that kind of stuff. And then finally they moved into town and didn't have a place to keep it, and so it found its way out here to Losey's Home for Wayward Olivers and other. And for a couple years it sat here, and then the price, if you all remember when the price of gas got over $4 a gallon, I was mowing yard with a 550. Love driving my Olivers, but this little 2-cylinder diesel sitting there, and so I asked my in-laws, I'm like, "You mind if I use that?" They're like, no, you know, use it, keep it from going bad. And this thing is so great on fuel. It just I can mow half the summer on a tank full of fuel, and starts great. Just easy to maintain little tractor. I gotta say, as far as the controls and stuff, Germans must be smaller than me. I got 2 sticks to shift with. I miss my 1-stick Oliver. My big feet, I can't get on just the left brake pedal and not hit the parking brake lever. It's got a dual stage clutch. That's not as nice as the independent clutch that Oliver has. So I still like my Oliver better, but it's a nice little tractor for, got a 6-foot deck back here that that I mow with, finish mowing, and it does a great job with that. It has good enough power for it. I think the 550 lugs a little better when I get into heavy grass than this does, but still a good handy little tractor. This is probably what I guess you could say I started my driving career out on. Minneapolis Moline 114 hydrostatic lawnmower. It was built by Jacobson for Minneapolis Moline. Dad bought this about a year or so before Oliver came out with their line of lawnmowers that were built by Jacobson. And so, do I wish it was an Oliver? You bet. But it's still a pretty unique lawnmower, being a mini mow. Really for, I think this is a 71. It's pretty loaded. I haven't used it in the last couple of years. One of the spindles, it's a cast aluminum deck. This actually has the Morning Glory blue deck on it, which was supposed to be on the white version of this lawnmower, garden tractor, whatever you want to call it. And one of the spindles, the bearings have gotten loose in the aluminum. And basically, I need to take it to a machine shop and have them bore the deck, put a sleeve in it so I can get it tight, but that spindle's wobbling and it's just really going to tear it up if I keep mowing with it. Kohler powered tractor. But yeah, some of the bells and whistles, I mean, full hydrostatic, entirely with this lever forward and back. And then it was an electric lift, just a switch here. And I had an actuator on it to run the deck up and down. Electric PTO clutch. And this thing was decked out pretty good for back in, I believe it was 71, I think is the model year on this one. Oh, I robbed the key switch out of it too. My mother's lawnmower was having trouble and determining she had a bad key switch and did a little robbing real quick. So I need to get around and put that back on before it's definitely going to start. It's not 4-wheel drive, but I ordered front tires for it and they misunderstood me and sent me tractor tread ones on the front, but I think it looks pretty cool with them. So. And then the backs were getting bad, and I went ahead and got tractor tread for those. Boy, that's might be a little tougher on the turf, but climbing hills and getting around is so much better than with turf tires. I can live with a couple of blades or bits of grass getting turfed. And then there's Dad's warning. Basically to notify thieves that it had been marked for identification. His driver's license is number is stamped in a couple of spots, a couple obvious, a couple not so obvious, making it real easy to find it or identify it if it's ever stolen. So that's the mini mow lawnmower. My white 270. When the white name went on tractors, the story I've been told is that there was arguing between the Oliver branch and the Minneapolis Moline branch of White Motor as to whose name was going to go on the tractor line. Things were tough for White in the early 70s. There had been farm embargoes, so farming was tough. And just basically with the numbers they were producing, it no longer made sense to have two separate lines, and so they're going to consolidate. And nobody could seem to decide, and so finally White Motor, who owned Oliver at that time and Minneapolis Moline, said, that's it. We're going to put the white name on the tractor. We're going to pick a neutral color, and it's going to be the white tractor. For the most part, the Oliver tractors were the ones that survived. This is, for all intents and purposes, is an Oliver 1655. Same gas engine, same transmission, same hydraulics. They just put new sheet metal on it to make it look like the rest of the white line. Same 3-point hitch. I use this one for scraping snow in the wintertime. It is a gas engine. I have not seen too many gas 270s in my travels. And this belonged to my uncle, and they'd been having trouble with it. The distributor had gone bad, which these use a Holley distributor. Quite a few Oliver tractors did. Those Holley distributors are no longer parts support for them, so when they go bad, there's like a plate that wears out in there, and things get loose. They run like just terrible. And so they had messed with it, put electronic ignition in it. It wasn't straightening it out. Well, part of the problem was this, sometime before they bought it. This did not come from our dealership. When my uncle wanted a loader tractor, he said something to my grandfather, and Grandpa said, well, the local John Deere dealer actually has a white 270 with a loader on it in their inventory. It had been traded in by someone, originally sold by Ted's Service in Saline, Michigan. And so I'm guessing the clutch had been done at that point or something, because my uncle says they've never had the motor worked on it. But so I bought a Mallory distributor. You could get them when I bought this tractor, and they've been since discontinued. And when I was timing it up, the rotor inside the distributor was not lining up with the timing mark on the flywheel, and I ended up having to pull the valve cover off to get the timing right, find where top dead center was on number 1, because someone must have put the flywheel back on wrong, which got the timing marks in the wrong spot. I didn't think that was possible. The bolts are supposed to be spaced a little different, but never say never. There's some guys that can break a sandbox. Once I timed it to the valves on number 1, fired it up and just needed a little tweaking on timing from there, but it ran, and now it runs great. The 270 was not the first white tractor. I think technically the 4150, the big articulated, was. And then the 1955 and 1855 were both replaced with the 2105, which went back to a Perkins engine, probably something they should have stayed with. They were producing the 310 cheaper in-house than they could buy the 354 Perkins for. It didn't pan out to be the best idea. So they went back with Perkins for the 2105, and then the 285 essentially replaced the 1755. They felt that just enough of the same model in there with didn't need quite so many horsepower ranges. The 3 tractors were consolidated into 2, and we used to have a 2105. It was a 1978. When 2105s and 285s first come out, they did not have headlights in the grill. 270s, I think they started in 76. 2105 started in 74. I think 74 was when the first one was built. By 76, they put the headlights in the grill. So 270s, to the best of my knowledge, always had headlights up here. I put a full set of weights on the front, not because my blade is heavy, but because snow is slippery and it makes it steer easier having a set of weights up here. And got to store the weights somewhere, so why not there? That's the most this tractor usually does, is scrape in the wintertime. I've occasionally done some other chores with it, but usually just leave this blade on the back. And so you can even see how similar the dash is to a 1655. They replaced the upper cover with a plastic piece, which is hard to find a good one anymore. So I'm glad this one's in good shape. The hood on these was fiberglass. Side panels are still steel. And then they added this weight bracket on that actually hung in front of the front axle. Gave them room to put like the air cleaner in there. The 2105 and the 285 essentially used 1755 and 1955 rear ends. There was a lot of Oliver tractor in those early whites. The 4150 articulated tractor used final drives from a 2105, and then an articulation joint in the middle to join the two together. There was a 2150, and that used the Minneapolis Moline 585 engine, but the rear end was still Oliver. It used a 6-speed transmission with a 3-speed power shift, the over and under, on the Oliver hydraulics. So I think, personally, just from market share and brand loyalty, although I will say Minneapolis Moline has a great brand loyalty even to this day, but Oliver had the better market share. They would have been the better name to go with than to totally relabeling it. I think a lot of farmers felt betrayed that their tractor was no longer available. They didn't see it as a continuation of what they were already buying. It was something different. Even though parts from a 1655 will go right on this tractor, vice versa, it soured a lot of the milk. My 2155, you've probably seen it in some of my other videos. I overhauled the engine on it this last winter when it had a sleeve break and drop into the oil pan. This one is a 1981 model. This is the tail end of what they call the silver stripes. And that'd be these silver decals here with the white name spelled out white. In late 1981, I believe it was, right around 81, 82. White motor was, of course, having more trouble, and they broke off all the farm equipment from the truck and all the other equipment and sold it to a Texas Investment Corporation, TIC. And when that happened, TIC Well, the equipment line was changed to white farm equipment instead of white motor or just white. So that's when the WFE appears on both the side panel and up here on the grill. And that's also when they came out with the red and the decals to give them a little splash of color. And those became what they called the Series 2. For the most part, they were the same tractor, just some different graphics and artwork to make them look different. I got to talk to one of the engineers that worked on the 2135, 2155 project. And one of the questions I had for him was, the first couple of years these were out, you could only get them as two-wheel drive. And I said, why didn't you plan them with four-wheel drive at first? And he said that their thoughts were that tractors like the 4150, which could still be a row crop tractor, even though it was articulated, would be the future of high traction, high horsepower tractors, and that row crop tractors would just stay two-wheel drive from there on out. And obviously they missed the boat on that, because it's gotten to where it's hard to sell a two-wheel drive tractor, at least a new one. So that's why. And then there was enough demand for it. They added a transfer case and longer pinion shaft to drop it down and put a front axle under it. They went with a French-made axle for the front by a company called Soma, S-O-M-A. Parts are getting hard to find for those, because I don't think Soma's in business anymore. And you take care of them, they seem to hold up. I haven't had any trouble with this one other than a leaky seal on the hub out here that I had to fix, but I had to work on other people's when the dealership was open. We bought this one new. This one replaced our 2150 that we had on the farm. So I'm sure it was nice to have an air-conditioned cab to do all the work with, as opposed to an open station Oliver 2150. Pretty much the same engine as the 2150, a few more horses and a lot better drivetrain. Part of that 2135, 2155 project was redesigning the transmission to handle a lot more horsepower. And I think the goal idea was somewhere up around 250 horsepower continuous. And this final drive was used all the way up just about to the end of the white name. They were using Massey components on the last series, 8000 series, but 6000 series still used this final drive. There were some beefed up versions, and there's some differences, like the planetaries are a little wider in a 2155 because this has inboard planetaries, unlike some of the earlier Olivers that put them out there. Got your gear reduction, but it left you with a lot more adjustable wheel spacing, because you could slide them in and out of the axle and clamp them back down. And then the thought was they could use the same drivetrain to put in articulated tractors like my 4225, the 4270, and they had made a handful of, I think 3 or 4 325s. And I do believe the plan, the one engineer said, was they were planning on going up to 400 horsepower using a pair of these final drives in an articulated tractor. When they came out with what they call the Series 3, decals stayed the same, but the Series 3 improvements were largely in the cab. The cab was now an isolated cab. With this one, the fuel tank actually sticks back into the dash a little bit to get more fuel capacity. They were able to pull the fuel tank back, totally close off the front of the cab to seal it up from dust and dirt. And then they got a plastic fuel tank to put down here. It would come up around the wheel to get that lost fuel capacity from the top tank back. Something they couldn't do before with steel, and molded plastics made it a lot more feasible economically. The cab improvements to the Series 3 were quite a few, but just really brought the noise levels down in the cab. The cleanliness inside the cab was brought up. Much cleaner inside the cab with the isolation. So a Series 3, one of these is pretty nice. The shifter was improved. Just a lot nicer operator experience, I think, is what it really came down to. The rest of the tractor was largely unchanged. The white 4225. This is my biggest horse on the farm. It's a 1983 model year, and I think we bought it around 85. I remember talking to Dad. We had a field day here for white when the 4210s were out, red stripe ones, which would have been a Series 2, I guess, if you want to figure it that way. Like I was saying with the 2155s, because the Series 3 4210 essentially was the 4225. I asked, riding around with Dad, and I asked him, do you think you'll ever get one of these big articulated tractors? And he said, no, He felt they took too much room to turn around and just wouldn't be practical for our farm. And then a few years later, we end up with this, and I asked him, I said, hey, I didn't think we'd ever get one of these. And he said, well, White was having trouble and trying to raise money, and they had an abundance of inventory, and they had these things marked down cheap. And as Dad said, it was basically too good of a deal to walk away from, and so he bought this one. Still has the original tires on it. Powered by 3208 cat with the factory turbo. This is the only version of the Cat 3208 with a factory turbo in a White tractor. All the other versions were naturally aspirated. I've seen several that have been converted to a turbo, but as I was mentioning in the 2155 video, it uses the same final drives, but two sets of them. One for the front, one for the back half, as that 2155. Oh, I was discing with this a couple days ago. When I get it up in here, I can smell the skunk that sprayed it. Ooh, it still is stinking. So, we'll come around the back here. Here's the articulation joint. They improved that a lot over what the 4150 had. That one was prone to wearing out. These were a lot more durable, built heavier, and if you keep them greased up, I have no problems with this one. I grease it every 10 hours and it's still going strong. But as you can see, the similarities between this and the 2155, basically the same rear end. This cylinder here is a lift assist cylinder. It still has a lift cylinder inside for the 3-point hitch, but then you could optionally add this one, and you could add it on the other tractors that use this rear end, but that would increase the lift capacity of the 3-point hitch. I'm not going to say how much because I don't remember. You could get up to 4 valves on the 4225. This one came with 3. We added the 4th one on. 2 drive shafts in here. The top one is splined directly to the engine, so if the engine's turning, this one's turning. This one connects the 2 pinion shafts on the transmissions. So this one only turns when the tractor is moving, and it will go the opposite direction when you put it in reverse, and it changes speed depending on which gear. All the gear selections are in the front half, and the back half is just final drives. And then there's hydraulic oil in each. And there is a pump up on the front of this shaft that basically helps circulate, because the oil comes from the back half to help lubricate stuff in the front. Of course, then the front would eventually fill up, so you got a pump here that keeps returning oil to the rear to keep the 2 units level. But I've got a video on this one from almost 2 years ago. Put another link in. Showing it, giving a little more, some history on it, and showing it chisel plowing out in the field. Here's that WFE logo like I was telling in the on the 2155. I have replaced these lights with LEDs, and I just got one of those 4x5, 3x5. Same thing that GM used on a lot of cars in the early 80s or through the G cars, G frame cars. And I've got a 85 Cutlass Supreme, and it uses the exact same size headlight. So I just got on eBay and found a replacement light for my 85 Cutlass. And I did have to rearrange the wires on the plug because LEDs are polarity sensitive, and apparently a car is wired backwards from this tractor, but once I switched them around, they work great. They are bright. The White American, in this case the White American 80. This was essentially an Oliver 1655 or a White 270 with a Cummins engine in it. Used the 4B turbocharged in the case of the 80, non-turbo in the case of the 60. They were offered in 2 sizes. They used the name American because at that time they were the only tractor under 100 horsepower that were made in the United States of America. Used a lot of existing Oliver components. They basically brought out of the mothballs, did some updating. The 3-speed power shift now used a little electric switch to shift it instead of linkage. Of course, the Cummins engine. They were still open center hydraulics. The pump was moved up here onto the engine. which should make for easier servicing. So far, I haven't had to do anything other than change filter, but the brakes were still the dry disc brakes, and those did cause them some issues, a couple of recalls on those. They were trying to keep the cost down on this tractor where it's competitive, still have an American-made tractor, and of course you could order it in one of 4 colors. Order it in white, silver, cockshut red, Minneapolis Moline yellow, or Oliver green. Of course, the only way my dad would order them in is in Oliver green. We did sell a couple silver ones we transferred out from other dealers. This is one we had on the lot, and all the American series were built in Coldwater, Ohio. I did say the 80 used the 1655 rear end. The 60 used the 1555 rear end. There is differences there. The 1555 used a sliding spur gear transmission, which is cheaper to make, and the 80 or 1655 used a helical constant mesh sliding collar type shifting arrangement, which could get more power through, but it was also more expensive to produce. And of course, I gave them different price points for the 2 different tractors, but they were trying to keep the cost down to where they could be competitive. So the brakes didn't get updated, and that's probably something they should have spent the money on, put the money towards. Threw the Cummins 4B engine in it. Nice little engine, other than they're kind of rattly. Being a 4-cylinder diesel, you rev them up, they're all right, but at idle, boy, they really put a lot of vibration in the stuff. And I was told, Cummins told them there was a counterbalancing kit that would help smooth that out, and they recommended it for the application, and White didn't want to put the money into that because, once again, that'd raise the price point on the tractor. They did add differential lock, and that's what this baby here is. You got your dry brake out there and then a wet differential lock here. Just push button activation. They had some trouble with those because the seal that keeps the oil from going into the brakes would occasionally fail and get the brakes wet, and then they wouldn't work. There was a couple different fixes for that. They finally ended up with a different setter plate. I could see this one was changed. I might have even done this one. But it involved a better seal, but then they also put a weep hole that just comes down to the ground, and then that way if any oil should happen to slip by the seal, it goes on the ground instead of in on your brakes and making them ineffective, because they're dry brakes, so they're designed to be dry and they won't work when they're wet. Came out in '89, and the first year they did not have a cab available, open station only. They did eventually modify the cab from the 100 series to fit on the American, and that's what this, of course, is. Air conditioned, which makes it nice. I was round bailing with it just yesterday, and it was nice to get out of the heat and humidity. That's pretty much what this tractor does, is get hooked onto the round bailer in the spring and spends the whole summer on it, and then gets unhooked in the fall. I put the clean round bailer up, put it away, and generally this doesn't do too much after that. Might pull a couple wagons around. I've run augers with it before. I usually have it somewhere handy in the winter time in case there's a power outage to run the alternator or generator to make power, because that little 4-cylinder Cummins starts really good and is good on the fuel. And so if the power goes out in the winter and you don't want the pipes to freeze, put the American on. Still use the same 6-speed forward and 2 reverse transmission with the 3-speed over and under, so you could have up to 18 speeds forward. They did add a hydraulic clutch and hydraulic brake to the PTO. It's nice, definitely works good. By this time, Texas Investment Corporation, TIC, had trouble and gotten out of White Farm Equipment, and they sold it to Allied, who also owned they owned New Idea. That's how these ended up being built in Coldwater, Ohio at the New Idea factory, because Allied owned that and they now owned White. They were still pouring castings and making parts in Charles City, Iowa, shipping those to Coldwater, and then that's where assembly would happen. White sent word, actually by that point, AGCO had bought White. First they bought just the tractor line. So we were dealing with White New Idea and then AGCO White. And they sent word out that they were going to discontinue the American series. And this one was on the lot. And when Dad got word of that, he pulled it off the lot and put it in the barn, and we kept it for ourselves. Of course, we had to pay for it. Someone's got to pay for it. And but we had a white 2135 two-wheel drive on the farm that was basically doing the same job this one's doing now, way overpowered, but it was a paid-for tractor. So we sold the 2135 so we could get this, and this stayed on the farm. And it was, I guess, probably no surprise because they discontinued this, and then tractors got moved out of Coldwater, Ohio, and white tractors were then produced in Independence, Missouri at the Gleaner factory, which AGCO owned, in which they still owned the Coldwater facility, and they were still making corn planters there. Well, actually, White, at that point, White New Idea, still an Allied, still owned the Coldwater facility. So they were still making corn planters and New Idea products there. Later, AGCO did buy the rest of White New Idea. These were only built for, I think, about 3 years. This one's a 1990. I do believe 91 was the last year for them. So I'm glad Dad was smart enough to pull the trigger on getting this one. It's been a good little tractor, and they've really become collectible. The production was about 50-50 between green and silver. Not quite, because they did sell some red and yellow ones, but like 2% red and 2% yellow, and then somewhere around 48 green and 48 silver. So the red, a factory red or a factory yellow one, are hard to find. There's been some silver ones that have been repainted. And there's, if there is record of which ones were painted which color, AGCO hasn't released that at this point, but they, from what I understand, do have records on that. Be nice to know. Hint, hint, if anybody's watching. Last up is the newest tractor on the farm, the white 6125. So I was mentioning earlier, still uses the white final drives, like the 2155. Black tractor in a not well lit barn. It's kind of hard to see, but same basic final drives. But what they did was eliminated the 6-speed forward, 2 reverse transmission, and then the over and under drive, and replaced it with the Funk 18-speed forward, 9 reverse full power shift transmission. And then it has a Cummins 5.9 liter engine in front of it. Interesting note is that John Deere now owns Funk transmission. So, and then New Holland had been using the same transmission in some of their tractors. I say same, but not exactly the same. They had to do their modifications to work it with their application. And then AGCO decided to go that way, and they had to do modifications of their own. So they were paying licensing fees to John Deere and New Holland, and some of them were paying licensing fees back to them for modifications they'd made. So it's interesting. The checks must have just been flying back and forth all the time. Still used a lot of the modified 2155, 2135 two-wheel drive front axle. Some of the stuff had been changed on it, but the hubs and spindles are basically the same. And this actually has an American Series weight bracket on it. I did some measuring because they used essentially the AGCO Alice weights instead of the white weights. And I didn't have any of those weights, and I didn't want to buy a full set of weights when I already had weights sitting around. So I bought a American Series, and the bolt pattern was exactly the same. So I can put suitcase weights on there, white suitcase weights, which I don't run too much anymore because don't really need it for planting corn or running wagons, which are its 2 main jobs. I've got a playlist of this tractor doing different jobs. That full power shift is awesome for doing things like road work with wagons. No having to push the clutch to shift gears, just bump the lever beside the seat. Push it forward for it to go gear up, push it back to go a gear down. And you just put it in forward, faster, slower, and then all the way back to reverse. If you're slowing down to an intersection, you can push down on the clutch pedal and the computer will automatically select the right gear down to 10th gear to put you in when you let back up on the clutch. Shifting up is nice for hauling wagons and stuff. Just no having to clutch or anything. So for something that sees a lot of road work like this one does, it's a great transmission, and so far it's held up. I've heard they're pricey to rebuild, and hopefully that never comes, or comes a long way off, but not too far off, because then who knows, they might not have parts. That's the 6125. And to the best of my knowledge, from what I can recall, this is the last tractor our dealership ever sold. AGCO was giving us some grief about not selling enough new iron. We had our 2105 on the farm, and so I said, well, you know, we could update the 2105 and hopefully things will improve by next year. So we did that, sold the 2105, got this tractor. Don't regret doing that. I've really liked this 6125, but things didn't improve the next year, and just between one thing and another, it was time. And that's when we closed, was in the summer of 98. Tractor I plan on keeping around for a long time because, well, I don't sell much, and also it's the last one we ever sold. So it's a memento as well as a workhorse. That should wrap up all the tractors. Hopefully I haven't missed anything. I guess if I have, I'll throw it in another video or something. And I appreciate everybody watching. Of course, there's still more to go. I think I'll work on tillage tools next. I got a lot of plows. Probably not as exciting as tractors, but I'll try to go through those a little quicker because there's a lot of plows. But I appreciate everybody watching, and we'll see you in the next video.